So I'm back after about a month and a half of putting the series on hold. Like I mentioned in the last update, I had been doing some console port work that I couldn't really talk about because of NDAs. And I went straight from that into demoing Gunmetal Arcadia Zero at some local events here in Texas. But I'm back to full-time development on the roguelike Gunmetal Arcadia now, and in fact, as I mentioned in Monday's blog, this is the first time in over a year that I'm focused solely on that game, not splitting my time with contract work or Gunmetal Arcadia Zero or planning a GDC talk or whatever else. So yeah, it'll be nice to have sort of one thing to focus on. I'm hoping to have this game finished and shipped by early 2017. So yeah, it's going to be an exciting couple of months. Recently I've been, I guess before I put the series on hold, I was already doing a little bit of procedural level generation, and since I've come back, I've been sort of trying to establish a framework for some of the procedural systems, and specifically trying to encapsulate some of the concepts that existed already in Gunmetal Arcadia Zero, but find ways to express those procedurally. So I'll be taking a look at one of those today, and maybe talking a little bit more about some of what I'll be doing in the future. So I'll go over to my screen here. This is actually the second time I've attempted to record this. The first one did not go very well, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed that this one works. So this is my editor for the roguelike Gunmetal Arcadia. I think I showed a little bit of this in one or two of my previous updates, but essentially, rather than having an entire screen's worth of tiles, I'm working on smaller prefabs that get composited into a full screen room, or multiple rooms that are sort of grouped together into a scrolling region. So I think this is new since the last time I talked about this. I have what I call spawn opportunities, and that vocabulary is comes a little bit from my history with Gearbox and the Borderlands games. But essentially, when I create a room procedurally, it has some intent associated with it. It could be a generic combat space, it could be a treasure room or an item shop, it could be a challenge room. But depending on what its intent is, there are different types of things I might want to spawn there. And these prefabs can include spawn points that are associated with those different types of things. So for instance, here I have an opportunity spawn point, and it's tagged as an enemy spawn point. So if this were a combat room or a challenge room and I wanted to spawn enemies, what I would do is, after I had assembled all these prefabs together, I would look for these spawn points, and I would say, okay, I know that I want to spawn, 2 enemies, 3 enemies, however many. I would say, do I have enough spawn points? If so, choose those at random and put an enemy there. So that's not the thing that I'm focused on today, but that's something new I think since last time, so I wanted to mention that quickly. But I should be able to play the game from the editor here. It's a little bit different than Zero because I don't have a specific map that I'm jumping into, but it should go ahead and build a level here. So we can see that. You'll notice too, this is a new character. This is Grackle. If you played Gunmetal Arcadia Zero, you may remember Grackle as the owner of the hotel in the second level. She is a playable character in this one. Being a retired weaponsmith, I'm imagining she will probably either start with some better weapons or have a bonus to weapons across the board, but I'm still, figuring out what exactly all of the character bonuses will be. I also haven't finished designing her sprite sheet, so some of these frames of animation are still just copies of Vireo. And I mean, fundamentally they are going to sort of share the same skeleton, but pushing some pixels around to sort of change the silhouette. At least the direction I'm going with. But no, the thing I wanted to talk about today has to do with this door over here. So in Gunmetal Arcadia Zero, you had challenge rooms where you'd go through a door and doors would close behind you, some enemies would spawn, and you would have to kill the enemies before the doors would unlock and you would escape. And it would also drop a treasure chest. So I've been working on encapsulating that concept in a procedural nature here. So I'll show how this works first and then talk a little bit about it. So I go through here, it puts me in a room, spawns some slimes. So I'll go ahead and kill these guys. the door opens. I don't have a treasure chest that drops yet, but that will be probably the next thing I work on. So I can go back through here, and it takes me back where I was. So other than the treasure chest, I've mostly encapsulated that concept of what a challenge room is, but fundamentally it's implemented very, very differently from Zero. So go ahead, I actually have the Zero editor open here to one of these rooms. The way that I would build these in Gunmetal Arcadia Zero is I would have enemies placed directly in the level, and they would have some markup added to them. So I would have to place this markup on every single enemy. And it's always the same for everyone, but I still had to do it all by hand. And basically this says, when the enemy is loaded, it increments the lock counter. When the enemy dies, it decrements the lock counter. Meanwhile, the door here is programmed to automatically watch for changes to the lock counter, so it locks itself immediately as soon as the enemies spawn, and then once they're all dead, it unlocks itself. You can see over here on the slimes, I have the same markup. So with the roguelike game, because I'm not placing enemies directly into levels, I can't place this markup on those instances, so I needed to find a new way to sort of express the same concept. And I've done this with what I'm calling mix-ins. This isn't maybe necessarily the most accurate term because a mix-in is a programming concept, but it felt like a sort of similar thing to me. So I have this thing over here, event lock enemy. And this is actually just the same markup that you just saw on those instances in Zero. When the entity is loaded, increment the lock counter. When it dies, decrement it. But the way that this gets applied to entities is a little bit different. In the past, to spawn an entity, I would give it a definition file, which is just some XML markup that's been cooked down to a binary format. What I do now is I can provide an arbitrary list of definition files. So in addition to, say, the definition data for, an egg or a slime, I can also provide the file for this mix-in. And what it'll do is, after it goes through and spawns the enemy and applies all of its definition data from that markup, it will go on to the next file in the list, which would be this mix-in, and it will apply whatever markup is in there. So fundamentally, it ends up doing the exact same thing that would have happened in Gunmetal Arcadia Zero with this, custom markup per instance. It's just expressed a little bit differently in code. If I go over here to the code, the way this works is this is part of the code for spawning entities in response to the room having a certain intent. So here I'm looking at challenge rooms. And I say, okay, add this mix-in that's called the event lock enemy. The name here is sort of automatically generated from some naming conventions that are specified within the editor. And then when it tries to spawn the enemies, it will attach those, whatever mix-ins I specify here, it will attach those to the entity when it spawns them. So it adds the extra markup, and they behave exactly as they would have in Gunmetal Arcadia Zero. So yeah, I mean, I guess I already played through it, but I'll do it again just to sort of, narrate what's going on as it happens. Oh, I guess I forgot to mention too, I'm doing a similar sort of thing with the doors themselves. So on this side, this is just a door that you can walk through at any time. There's no restriction on how this works. On the other side, because it's a challenge room, it knows that it needs to spawn a door that can close behind itself. You'll see there too, it spawns different types of enemies this time. There's a list of enemies that you can choose from randomly. The rest of this room, you may notice, looks the same as it did before. I think I'm using a fixed seed right now just for testing, but this stuff will be randomized eventually. But yeah, that's sort of one of the things I've been working on lately. And basically, like I said, I'm sort of focused right now on trying to finalize all these sorts of frameworks for what will be involved in procedural generation across this entire game. Once that's done, then I can move on to content generation and actually, authoring all the different sorts of things that can happen using that framework. I've been working a little bit too on the the notion of events and actions that occur in one session directly informing the next one. That's been sort of the high-level promise of this game from the very, very start, and I have finally started writing some code to express that. There was a video update I did sometime late last year, I think, where I talked a little bit about how I was moving in a direction where, rather than sort of influencing sliders under the hood, I was going in a direction of very clearly defined cause and effect pairs. And at least with the code that I've written so far, it feels like that's going to be a very, very easy thing to represent in code, so that's nice. And I'll probably talk a little bit more about that in a future blog post or video update. But yeah, I'm glad to see that apparently the recording works this time. As I said, this is take 2. My camera just shut itself off last time, so I don't know what that was about. As always, thank you for watching. This series is supported through Patreon. I want to give a shout out to Patreon supporters Jace, Benjamin, and Opa and Nana for their contributions. You can find the links to my Patreon in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.